Hello everybody, it's Kevin here again, and this should be the second video that you watch for this week. So the first video should be the presentation that I do in front of a whiteboard, kind of going over how APIs work, what they are, what their uses are, and all that sort of stuff, all the underlying framework. So this here API is the one that we're going to be using for our application. So if you can tell here, this here is my connection string. So this here connects to my MongoDB instance. We're going to go over relational and non-relational databases as well. So for the purpose of this video though is to kind of give you an idea of what we're going to be doing with this API, and then you're going to be using this API locally as well. So yeah, you're going to have to get familiar with it. So the one thing that you're not going to have to do is you're not going to have to make any modifications to this API. I'm going to push this to my GitHub, and you should be able to clone it and run it from your device, from your computer. If you want to install it to follow along with the lecture videos, you can go to Node.js and download the current version of Node.js and install MongoDB as well. So you would go to this here location, MongoDB, but honestly just look up MongoDB installation and Node.js installation online and you'll get to the links. Once you do that though, you can get the API started. But before we go into how to install it, let's kind of go over what it does. And all it is it's just a very simple API that handles customer and authentication related stuff. There's some more functionality that I can implement here, but as of right now we're not going to worry about that. So there's receipts, for example, transactions, users, but none of that is implemented yet. What matters though is the authentication. So this route does use JSON Web Tokens, JWT, and it's just a method of authentication basically. So what we can use this API for, like I said, is just for getting information, and that information is stored inside of a database. So if we go back to index.js here, that database is here. We connect to that database right away. We open up that database, we do that database connection, which you can see by this message here logged on the console. MongoDB connected. Again, you don't have to know Node.js or how any of this works. What matters is that you're going to be sending requests to it and you're going to be starting it. So we have a couple routes. We have the auth test, which all that does is it basically it authenticates essentially. That's all it does. It just verifies a token. And this is to handle any other route that we haven't defined. So if we go and try to make a call to like / ABCDEFG, it'll just return route not found, check method type, params, and spelling. And what else? This here just starts up the API basically. We have our customer routes, and the customer routes are the create, read, update, and delete actions. So there's a model, and that model is the customer model. So this is kind of what we were going over earlier with how we can structure the data. So we have a customer has a first name, a last name, a phone number, an address, city, state, and email. This is the way that it's stored inside of the database. So this is quite important. And if you go and reference something like this in your mobile application, it's important to have the same exact model, same exact class. So if we go back to customer routes.js, we have a post route for creating the customer. And what we do is we check the token. We check to see if the token is valid. And if it's not valid, we just say, hey, there's an authentication problem. If the token is good though, notice this verify token function, which if we F12 into, all it does is it tries to verify the token. And if the result is undefined, then we know that it wasn't correctly verified. And if the result isn't undefined, then we know that it was good basically. And if something breaks, we just return false, which means that it wasn't verified properly. Then what we do is we take in the stuff that we pass in through the request body and we save it to the database essentially. It makes it really simple. Node.js and Mongoose, MongoDB essentially. Mongoose is the what do you call it? Pull it up here. It's the package that we're using. Mongoose is just the package that we use to access the database. Makes it quite simple to do create, read, update, and delete actions or operations. So we have our create area that creates it. If there's an error, we return an error. If not, we say that there was an authentication problem because, again, we check to see if it's valid or not. And then this area does handle basically grabbing the token, and if nothing's there, then we might throw an exception. We got to catch those exceptions. The get customer, same deal, authenticate them. If they're authenticated, we go and get all the customers and return them. Update, we update a customer by an ID, so first we look for the customer, see if they exist, and then we update them based on the stuff that's inside of the request body, and then we can delete them as well. Again, the logic is not super important, it's just knowing what's available. So from the developer perspective, the API is running. So how do we get the API running though? All we have to do is we have to do nodemon. Well, first, assuming that you clone this, so first you're going to clone this to your desktop or wherever you're going to store this API. First you need to clone it. So once you clone it there, you open it with VS Code. Once you open it with VS Code, open up a terminal, and then you do npm install. What npm install does is it goes to your package.json. It installs all the dependencies there. You also have your package lock.json, but not quite as big of a deal. If you run into any issues though, any issues at all, like it might tell you, hey, you need to, it can't run because something's missing, do npm install, and then the package name. So if mongoose is missing, then do mongoose. npm install mongoose. If express is missing, then npm install express. That's what you would do until it starts running. But once you have everything set up, you would just do nodemon, and it starts up the API on port 1250. If for any reason you can't run on port 1250, you can update your port via this port variable, which if I F12 into that, it's defined right here, port 1250. Now that this is running, I will also provide the Postman collection. So to start, we have our login. So if you pass in a junk username, try to log in, something's wrong, right? Something broke. It's 401 unauthorized, kind of like I mentioned with those status codes that we can send back and forth. And Postman gives you a lot of useful documentation here. Just hover over stuff. See, like that. Tells you exactly where, like what processes took up, the amount of time that it says it took up. Also the payload size. So here though, if we go and pass in the correct username and password, which is what I've added inside of the database, all we do is we just send the request and we get a success. So it was successful, and we get some data saying that, hey, the user ID is this right here, and then the token is this. This is what we would use for our payloads. So if we look at our tests, this is not supposed to be a Postman introduction. We'll be covering that probably next week. So all I'm doing here is I'm just storing the token that we get back from here, and we're going to use that as a variable. So we have this variable here that we can access, and then if we want to go and get our users, we need to have that token to authenticate ourselves. So we go and send this request. There's our users. If we see here, get rid of this here token, send the request, there's an authentication problem. So that's how we can use that. If we want to add a user, we can do this. So username test, password dogecoin1 bc@bc.com, and call them a user here for their authentication level. Send that request. Remember, we have that token under authorization. So the user was created. We returned a 201 created. And if we get our users, you should see our updated user, which we do right here. We can use all of this information throughout our mobile application or web application or whatever is consuming this API. So that's about it with this API. Let's see if I'm missing anything that I need to cover. We covered HTTPS, HTTP, APIs. One thing that I did not mention is TLS, the Transport Layer Protocol, or yeah, I believe that's what it was. There's let's see here. I'm gonna pull up a map actually to show off. Yep. So there's a little bit of stuff with TLS, so it's just the two-way communication between the client and the server, and using SSL, you can essentially have like a handshake that happens between them. Not gonna get super into the weeds with that because it's not super important for just us as developers, just writing the logic. Now, when you're writing your own API, which we're not going to cover in this here course, but when you do write your own API, it's important to have an idea of how those items work. However, just to consume the API, just be aware that it exists, and it's essentially just the secure side of the HTTPS. And TLS, of course, is the transportation side of it, and HTTP is the application layer, so the actual data that's being sent back and forth. So, yeah, other than that, here is the API. I'll be uploading it to my Git. I'll actually include that in the description too, just for convenience. And yeah, let me know if there's any questions, but that's about it. Thanks for watching.